So thank you everyone for having me here today, and thank you for the co-panelists again for staying up in the middle of the night. I feel almost bad that I'm taking the earlier slot because you all probably want to go to bed. So this conference theme of transformation in the digital age prompted me to revisit a chapter I've recently just finished writing for a forthcoming edited volume on Through the Looking Glass, Lewis Carroll's sequel to Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I began studying Alice back when the first iPad launched, and one of the early 2010 apps was simply Alice for the iPad. Does anyone remember this? It showed off interactive features by letting you throw parts at the Queen of Hearts and tilt the iPad to make Alice grow or shrink and so forth. It made sense as an early app. Alice is iconic and is in the public domain. In the mid-2000s, so right before the iPad launch, I was producing luxury books in London at the Folio Society. And when I was working on a reprint of Alice, I thought, why do people buy this? There are countless versions, and here we see two published in the digital age, and in some ways in competition with each other. So why would people choose this expensive but humble-looking edition? Why this edition of Alice? It's part of a 2-volume set sold in a slipcase with looking glass, which had its 150th anniversary 2 years ago. Carolian's Franziska Colt and Justine Hoyot pulled together contributors for the forthcoming volume. I took it as an opportunity to recognize types of editions of Looking Glass. And the thing is, these types are not specific to Looking Glass or Alice. They apply to any number of works of fiction and nonfiction. My chapter for the Looking Glass volume considers the publishing strategy that drives the design, release, and reception of these types of editions. Looking Glass is a case study for this typology, which many of us are familiar with, but for which there isn't an interdisciplinary guide. What I further aim to do today is illustrate that typology and make it accessible here beyond Carolian studies. Most of the examples I've chosen are from large commercial English language publishers in order to increase the likelihood that they're familiar. But these types of editions have long been published in other languages and by small and medium-sized commercial houses, private presses, and self-publishers from all over the world. These types transcend genres, language, scales of publishers, locations, and time periods. They transcend Alice. So our case study. Alice's Adventures in Wonderland was first published in 1865 in London by Macmillan. They published Through the Looking Glass, the sequel, in 1871. Author Lewis Carroll himself, as I've recovered elsewhere, was effectively an art director. He strategized the title's Victorian market segmentation with a range of editions that most significantly targeted consumers by class and age, respectively. Across these two titles, publishers have since released standalone, companion, and omnibus editions, multi-volume sets, series editions, and series sets. Even collectors can muddle these publication types because their differences can be subtle, but they are strategic. Publications of Looking Glass, like those of other sequels, are defined by their relationship to the publication of a prior text. Publishers trade on that textual relationship by giving consumers and readers paratextual clues of it. Peritexts, a term of course developed by French literary theorist Gérard Genette, are messages that frame the author's text. We become aware of them, some of them at least, from an early age, as we see in these elementary school posters. The parts of a book are the material articulation of a specific publishing strategy, evidence of why the publisher released the book, who it targets, and what it means. Still, such clues can go unnoticed or observed but unconsidered by children and adults alike. So we'll differentiate between types of editions, considering examples, explaining publishers' rationales, and suggesting their impacts on how consumers receive the books and readers receive the story. This guide to repackaging helps us unravel what I've coined elsewhere as the material evolution of books that are published in multiple editions and consequently have enduring appeal. And here I use edition as it is used in industry where it means a repackaging. With each edition, publishers manipulate what Jeanette calls the Peritexts in order to sell books. Consumers can decode the Peritexts in order to ascertain the type or types of edition a book is, and further, its target audiences and genres. Peritexts are publishers' tools and consumers' clues. Jeanette writes that Peritext equals peritext plus epitext. Peritext is elements that are materially appended to the volume that contain the text, the parts of a book. Epitext is messages that circulate freely in physical and social spaces. We can think author interviews, advertisements, and social media posts. Today, we're focused on peritext, those messages that are part of the physical book. Among peritextual messages that most clearly communicate type of edition are the series list, typically placed in the book's front matter, and the summary placed on the back cover or dust jacket. These peritexts explicitly articulate an edition of Looking Glass's relationship to an edition of Alice, and/or they locate it within a curated group of other titles. The look and feel of the book are more subtle peritextual evidence of edition type. These include cover design, illustrations, paper stock, binding method, and so forth, done in a style that mirrors the related edition of Alice and any other books with which the publisher has strategically grouped it. Now, we need to begin with book one, Wonderland. When it is published without any peritextual link to the sequel, it's called a standalone edition because, well, it stands alone on a bookshelf. Its peritext doesn't link it with another book. Publishers often release standalones as such because of little or no market interest, financial or human resources, or internal enthusiasm to pair it with the sequel. So basically, no time, money, or demand. As a result, the market has always been flooded with more Alices than Looking Glasses. Alice is the lead dominant title. It always has been, and that won't change. Companion editions are like bookends. They form a matching pair. The two books have related cover art and similar treatment of illustrations, as well as the same trim size, page layout, typography, paper stock, inking, binding method, and so forth. They are published by the same company and have a similar, if not the same, retail price. A companion edition of Looking Glass may be published at roughly the same time as Alice, or it may be published sometime later. If the companion edition of Looking Glass was published simultaneously or within months of Alice, the publisher intended to publish both books from the start. If Alice was published years before the companion edition of Looking Glass, it may be an indication that the publisher was testing the market with Alice before releasing Looking Glass. That is, the publisher's delayed investment in a companion edition of Looking Glass is a likely indication that their edition of Alice was a relatively strong seller. Companion editions are sold individually, which means it is possible for the audience to discover Looking Glass before Alice, but they may also be sold as a set. More unusually, their success may also lead to the publication of an omnibus edition that maintains an art direction shared by companion editions. And we see one of those rollover companion editions from companion to omnibus here with the Little Folks edition. Omnibus is defined in the Oxford English Dictionary as a book consisting of several reprinted works by a single author or various items of a similar genre, usually published as a single volume. Omnibus editions of Looking Glass bind it together with Alice, two books for the price of one, so it seems to the consumer. Yet it is common for omnibus editions to leave off or minimize Looking Glass in the title on the cover. And we see that here, where only one of the editions actually says Looking Glass on it. This indicates that the publisher believes Alice is the consumer draw. Looking Glass is a bonus. The text of Looking Glass bulks up the book, making it look and feel more substantial, and justifying a higher retail price than Alice would merit on its own. In either case, omnibus editions combine texts to paradoxically equal higher profit for the publisher and good perceived value for the consumer. Some publishers expand on Alice and Looking Glass by binding them with other text written by Carroll in so-called complete work volumes. Depending on the Peritexts, consumers perceive omnibuses as economical, giftable, collectible, and/or scholarly. 2-volume Alices, pair Alice and Looking Glass, 1 volume per title, as one item with one ISBN. Like omnibus editions, consumers acquire both texts together. Unlike omnibus editions, readers read each story in its own volume, which is typically less cumbersome to handle than an omnibus. These sets house both volumes together in a box or slipcase. The 2 volumes may have been previously published and sold individually as companion editions, or they may be published for the first time as a slipcased set. Much more rarely, publishers divide each of the Alice texts into multiple slim volumes, roughly 1 volume per chapter, and sell them as a set of more than 20 volumes. Sets sell Alice and Looking Glass simultaneously, and the fact that they are 2 different texts is readily apparent. They are therefore presented to the consumer on more equal footing than when they are released as companion volumes with staggered publication dates or packaged as an omnibus. However, sets are slipcased such that Alice is on the left and Looking Glass is on the right, which is a linear representation of the order in which the stories were written. As with omnibus editions, in which Alice precedes Looking Glass, the publisher communicates to the consumer an ideal order in which to read the texts. Unlike an omnibus, though, the modular nature of sets enables the consumer to rearrange the sequence of Alice and Looking Glass within the slipcase. A sturdy slipcase adds substantial value to the publisher's production cost, but it represents even greater perceived value to the consumer. The publisher can charge more for this value add than it costs them. Sets are positioned by publishers and therefore perceived by consumers as giftable and collectible. Multi-title series publish each of Alice and Looking Glass in individual volumes or omnibuses as part of a curated group. A series consists of multiple titles that are classic children's books, Victorian novels, or banned books, for example. Like companion editions, books in a series are released by the same publisher, sold individually, and share common design elements. A cohesive series design frames a range of texts as a group. Unlike the types of editions we've discussed so far, the branding of Alice and Looking Glass in a multi-volume series is not primarily about Alice or even Carroll. The identity of each book in the series is subsumed by the collective identity that the publisher ascribes to the whole group. Series publication grows the audience for any one title because the series attracts not only consumers who are interested in that particular title, but a broader consumer base that is interested in the larger theme of the group of works. Publishers of a series edition can sell Alice to not only Alice fans, but to readers of, for example, books that were adapted into movies. The theme that the publishers use to connect the group of works frames how readers of a series edition perceive Carroll's work, whether it be dusty among classics or dangerous among banned books. It would therefore be highly unusual for Looking Glass to be published in a series without Alice. The publication of a series edition of Looking Glass is led not only by Alice, but also by the theme of the series. Series sets combine either all of the books in a series or only the most popular books in a series into a slipcase. The consumer whose decision to purchase a series set is driven by other titles that are contained in the set acquires Looking Glass incidentally. For this reason, these editions of Looking Glass might be the least desired of all edition types. Like Alice sets, a series set is sold as one item with one ISBN. The series may be published only as a set, or the books in the series may also be published individually. In that case, the regular retail price of a series set is usually cheaper than the cost of purchasing all of the books individually. Although a slipcase means that the publisher incurs extra manufacturing and packing costs when bundling the books, it is to their advantage to sell, say, a dozen slipcase books at once, rather than hope a consumer will purchase the same number of books over a longer period of time. While purchasing a set means that the average price per book drops, the consumer must be willing and able to invest more money at one time. Sets are therefore among the least desired and least accessible editions. But publishers ensure that there's an Alice for everyone, and the types of editions can blur because a book may fall into multiple categories. As Alice or Looking Glass, or indeed any often republished title ages, particularly when they enter the public domain, the competition gets stiffer. Market saturation drives publishers to refine peritexts, pushing unique selling points that target new audiences and make collectors of existing audiences. And we've seen in these slides examples of single publishers releasing more than one edition, therefore competing with themselves. Market saturation and the increased speed and possibilities afforded by digital technology accelerate material evolution. By recognizing how and why publishers manipulate peritexts to position and differentiate types of editions, consumers and readers become more critical in their acquisition of books and their reading of text. I hope this classification of types and its consideration of materiality as an interface between publishers and consumers or readers will be useful to you in your own research, whether you're engaged with fiction or nonfiction, publishing studies or reception studies, any number of bibliographic interests. This kind of publishing strategy has relevance to transforming text in the digital age and before it. And as I say, I offer this as a frame of reference for decoding editions. Thank you very much. And that